All right, and we're back now, and it's time for us to review the week. But we left on a note where Nerima was going to respond to, well, the discussion that we are having, and this is in regards to the youth apparently having seen the light, as it were, politically speaking, and there could be change. But of course, that is subject to discussion. So, Nerima, you wanted to weigh in on that before we move on to review some of the things that have been happening. But the question, of course, here being the fact that, yes, there may be conversation that's going on the ground from the youth, but does that translate to change?
I believe that it will. I believe that we're going to see a change in a transition. The last election, we had much more independent candidates. A few of them won. We're seeing the development of new parties in backyards that we could never imagine. We've seen them win. And I think that's going to be a change in 2022. And that's the sign. So as much as we want to discuss about old political leaders and parties.
The question then might be, do the youth, do you feel they fully understand the qualities of leadership? And the reason I ask that is because we have a number of young MPs who are in Parliament right now.
But when we look at the translation, understand the qualities of leadership and characteristics of a leader?
The reason I'm asking...
the whole country.
Sorry?
I think that is the wrong approach to the whole
If you're going to ask
I'm wrong, it doesn't mean that if you are wrong, then you are right. You know, two wrongs don't make a right. I think the youth ought to take the initiative to change this country. After all, the future belongs to them. Wherever I am, I'm already settled, and I know the projection my life is taking, and therefore I might not be really interested in how the politics of the country turn out. But then the youths have the future in their hands. What do they want to make of it? How do they want to live what legacy do they want to live? What kind of life do they want their children to live? And what are the examples and the best practices they can borrow from around the world? Look at Gaddafi, for example. Gaddafi became the president of Libya at the prime age of 29. Look at Castro and Che Guevara. These were people in the bush fighting in their 20s, and they were able to transform not just their countries, but the world and the way people view politics. And those are the challenges that we are throwing back to the youth. I've been a youth myself. I know the challenges that we face. I remember the days sitting in the jobless corner where you would be arrested for no good reason by the police. And I know, I probably might not be able to relate with the youths of today, but then I don't think that the challenges are very much different. And even then, I had an ideology. Even then, I had some inclination as to what Kenya should be. Do we need to go more tribal? Do we need to fight for our politician? Do you need to get paid to go to Facebook to insult the rival, to your preferred candidate? Do you need to worship a leader? Can't you yourself be a leader and offer some alternative? And those are the things we want our youth to think about.
The most dangerous thing being peddled here is that if you have a problem, then different is the solution. That does not make sense. If you have malaria and you're taking Panadol, just taking headaches will not change. And this is the problem, because we are propagating this idea that the youth are just looking for different. How is that a solution? You understand? The disease Kenya faces is not a dynasty problem. Look at how many governors are corrupt. Is Waititu a dynasty?
No.
Is Sonko a dynasty? Is Babu Owino a dynasty? You see, just saying that if this is the problem, get another one, that's not the solution. The solution that we have to address, and if we're genuine with this country, is what is our ideology and what is the methodology of our ideology. Very simple. And for as long as the youth are not participating in an ideology that has a method to ascend it to power, let me guarantee you, then in 2022, we will multiply Sonkos across this country by 20. We will multiply Babu Owinos by 20, because the ideology you're perpetuating is different, is better. So if someone is idolizing the kind of politics that Sonko has, and that's the danger. Because Sonko, when he was busy embarrassing Ken Okoth at his funeral, the youth were clapping. And that is the danger. Different is not a solution.
Okay. You know, Mike, I have to quip.
And I want us to close on that now.
When we talk about youth, I am youth. Nerima probably doesn't know. I'm 32 years old. I'm youth. I am youth who has sought political office. I am youth who has a track record of being a youth leader. I am youth who in 2013 was the leader coordinating the youth campaigns for CORD in this country entirely. I do not speak from a remote point. And 2013 to now, maybe 6 years, I am youth who has been the president of Student Union in this country, the youngest that was. I speak about youth with an understanding that's far deeper than the superficial, what we want to call youth. There is a reason I have called young people to not box themselves into youth. I remember when I used to be called to come and discuss youth and politics, at one point I told one of the editors, I don't want to talk about youth because youth is transient. I want to talk about national security. I want to talk about our policies in agriculture and many things. I want to talk about the manufacturing sector in this country. I want to talk about tax and the taxation policy. Because this whole thing about youth being made to look like they're people who cannot think and who cannot make the right decision and who can be swayed merely by populism, whereas populism has taken a stem in the world, globally. It is not about the youth. And this is where I take a departure from the perception that Nerima has, which she is reporting. It's not her perception. She is reporting the perception of the young people that she has interacted with, which does not necessarily represent the perception of the youth in this country. The trouble with our country still remains very largely tribalism and negative ethnicity. It's not going to go away. We may wish that it did. I was in the university not too long ago, 9 years ago, being elected as president, when Kikuyu young male came to ask the Kikuyu young female why they had voted for a Jaluo. That was the youth. And that has not changed in the villages where the majority of our young people live. So we need to work consistently and constantly towards a paradigm shift that will ensure that as our young people go to any election, they reach out for the best in every leader, as opposed to what seems to be running away from what they have been fed is their problem. We want to say that, you try to christen our problem as though it is a dynasty problem. Mark has given a perfect example. The corruption crisis doesn't happen with dynasties alone. Of course, they have their share of blame to have. And I hope that in the long run, they are jailed for their perpetrations against humanity. But on the floor of our houses in our villages, there are questions that are not asked when a mother sees a son driving a 2019 Range Rover, which is 30 million shillings, and the son cannot explain what he does for a living. That's corruption. That's lack of accountability. When you go to a church and people are fighting for money, those are not dynasties. That's a societal problem. And so our young people need to be tweaked to know that this future is for them and their children, that their fathers have lived their lives and are facing their graves, and that the decisions they make today must be hinged on what the future has for them.
Wow. All right, well put, and I think that puts a close to the discussion on youth, unless it comes up now on the other topics that we are reviewing. And let's start with what has been on the headlines pretty much the whole of this weekend. It's the war on drugs taking shape. But, of course, as we have seen even in the headline today, that some MPs have been denied U.S. visas over drugs and terrorism. But the bigger question, and maybe what we need to also focus on as we discuss this, is the question of how this has continued for a long time, and the fact that there are very senior members of our leadership that seem to be involved in this, and how this can be dealt with. I'll start with you, Philip, yes. By virtue of the fact that you are a lawyer, and why it becomes so difficult sometimes to get to the bottom of this. Yet we have C.S. Matiang'i, who made it very clear that we're no longer, it's no longer games. And of course, we have seen Punjani being sought, his house being raided, but still, that is just a tip, in the iceberg.
I think, let me look at this holistically, and I'd like to say that I think our criminal justice system has been neglected for so long. It has never been at the front burner in our national political discourse. Not during the previous regimes, not today. And that is where we are going wrong. Crime is of major concern to each and every Kenyan, but then we never see our leadership talk about it. We've let it simmer, we've let it grow, and this is where we now find ourselves. Walk into a police station today and report a murder, which is a heinous crime. See how the police react. They'll give you an OB number, they'll take your statements, and highly likely that is where the matter will end. A murder will never be, I can tell you for a fact that less than 30% cases of murders are resolved. That means having a person charged, prosecuted, and a conviction meted out. That is where the problem lies. with the police, what are our policemen doing? What is the problem in the coast? Why do we have so many drug peddlers in the area? We saw a case of an OCS who had somebody arrested for drug trafficking released. And the drugs were released as well. What does that tell you about our police force? We had youths in Mombasa barricade a road for almost 3 hours. Yet within that local vicinity, there is an OCS, there is an OCPD, and there is a police station. What happened? Now, let's move on to our courts. We've seen or we've heard the reports coming out of the US in the Akasha case, where we are being told that lawyers, prosecutors, the courts were compromised. We know of the Akashas. I remember Akasha Senior one day walking out of the High Court here in Nairobi and lighting up a joint right outside the court, the Nairobi High Court back then. And nobody arrested him, and he walked out. He had to be murdered somewhere else for his life of criminality to come to an end. As for Akashas, the US has had to step in. And that is just a tip of the iceberg. There are many other forms of criminality. There are many other drug dealers within our country, and we have people protecting them. Punjani, for instance, we are being told that his home, and I presume that is where the drugs were being kept, was being guarded by more than 19 police officers. Do you want to tell me that none of these policemen knew what was going on in there? We are being told that he has another home here in Nairobi which is also being guarded by the police. We saw the case of fake gold the other day, which was being guarded by the police. In fact, a whole lot of it was inside a bank in containers containing fake gold.
Right in the CBD.
I mean,
all right.
Which kind of society are we living in?
Nerima, we have a societal problem. And of course, this speaks to impunity and corruption. Again, this is a bigger problem than we may think, because for there to be 19 policemen who are guarding somebody who apparently is dealing with drugs, for the judicial system to have been compromised, and this is information we're not getting locally. We're getting from a foreign court. And we have cases that we can point out where a foreign court has convicted, but those who have been named in that same conviction are scot-free to this day. We have a problem that we need to address. And I don't know whether you see a solution or you know a way that we can do this, because it looks like it's such a tight web of a cartel, for want of a better name.
It is an extremely tight web. I think that a lot of times when we especially talk about the future of this country and what people can do about it or young people can do about it, the environment is already difficult to create a solution. Where, as of now, if you want to do things prime and proper, you actually take the longer route. If we're talking about the judicial system, going to court, I know people who have court cases and they used the proper system of going to court, and it took 10 years plus, and they still ended up losing something, and someone paid a judge to get through in that case. So I think that countries have gone through seasons of corruption. We can talk about the United States with the government of gentlemen, where Chicago, we can talk about the mafia taking control of a state. But what is needed is authority. When you have a political leader or a political figure, if we look at even Tanzania, for instance, with Magufuli, taking a strong, active stance on corruption and minimizing it and making sure that even in his own cabinet or his own ministers follow through with it, and looking at the institutions that exist within the country to make sure to implement that. As long as we do not have that, it's very difficult, because we do live in a society of systems, and if the systems are broken, then it means that we would have to start over, and nobody wants to start over.
That strong leader that you're talking about, according to the president, he says that his hands are tied by the Constitution. Would you agree that to some degree the Constitution we have limits the authority that he can exercise, because really it has to go through the same judicial system, it's the same police officers? What is he expected to do, if I would use his words?
I wouldn't say that the Constitution limits his powers, because within even Chapter 6, we know what a good leader is. And even right now, we have recall. We are able to recall, but even we're not having that conversation as to how to recall members of parliament. If we're even now entering another subject matter to talk about the revenue bill, and even if we're talking about that, he cannot even control his own party. The president within Jubilee Party is having issues with his own party as a party leader. So I wouldn't say that it's the Constitution, it's the kind of leadership, it's the people within his houses, and even our speakers, and not even being able to agree. And the Constitution is all about deliberation, agreement, collaboration. If people cannot collaborate, you're going to find it very difficult to implement this Constitution.
Okay. And of course, part of the reason why they're not collaborating or refusing to collaborate is interests. But Mark, how do we get ourselves out of this?
First, we must understand one thing, that we're living in a very historical time for this country. I know it is easy to take the words of the president 4 years ago when he said, "Mnataka nifanye nini?" But the truth is, today as we speak, there is a man on the run because he owes Kenya money. Today as we speak, the Kimwarer and Aror case is live. It is in court. Today as we speak, we've got many people. In fact, in the papers today, there's a Briton in the docks for 39 million shillings in tax. Now, why am I pointing these things out? I'm pointing them out to remind this country that to arrest Al Capone, they would not get him on drug running, they could not get him on prostitution, they would not get him on selling liquor. What they could get him on was tax. And if you're going to fight corruption, you've got to fight it in every way possible. We've done currency changes. We've changed the office of the ODPP. We've changed DCI. We've changed how we investigate. We've brought international prosecutors to prosecute our cases. We've done more in this last 18 months in the fight against corruption than we've ever done. Our position as a country should be that these MPs we are hearing can't get a visa. They should also not get bail. That's the question. The question that this country should be talking about is when governors are told to stay out of office, good citizens of this country should be demanding that those governors step down. Because where in any developed country can you be accused of murder, accused of stealing from the people, and you're still in office? That is the tragedy of Kenya. That there are people who will stand and say because of constitution this, human rights that we can steal from the people and continue to be in office.
And that's why I bring in the constitution, Mark, because then these are the same people using through Akina Magal, sorry to use you as an example, but lawyers, very brilliant lawyers, to go and now go through the back door and still remain in office.
And that's the issue. You see, if you go to Japan, Korea, when a ship sinks and the Minister of Transport resigns, under which constitutional dispensation is he resigning? He's resigning based on the constitution of his character, the constitution of his ethics. And the problem with this country is we have no ethical sense to say. And
so how do we solve that?
The solution is simple in this country. Number one, we should be the kind of people who hound people out of office. It cannot...
Like IEBC?
No, let me tell you how to hound people out of office. The people of Kiambu should be holding a demonstration every day saying that the father of Yao and Yao should go home. That's what they should be doing, because that's your constitutional mandate. But we live in a country where someone steals from you and the next day you're on the street following him as he goes to court. There's something totally insane about you, and that's what we need to fix. Unless, listen, you cannot fix a country if its citizens have decided to act like mad people.
Okay, so like one politician says, maybe pain is what will bring that change.
No, in this country, we live in pain every day.
No, maybe it's not yet painful enough. You see, the pain has to be increased to a level where it is a matter of do or die. I don't think we are there yet.
Kenyans, first, we'll never get there because the economy works in this country. By the way, it functions. As broken and it functions. So the time for that pain is never going to come. Because have we fixed transport? How long does it take us to get here? here at 6
let me
in the
jump
morning.
I know, and we've accepted that 3 hours, 3 hours from here to town is okay, and we're okay with it. David, we need solutions. We've done very well in highlighting the problem. And here's the thing, with Kenyans, we're very good at highlighting and making sure that everybody understands this is our issue, but where are the solutions? The thinking that we're talking about, that the youth maybe need to come up with ideology.
The fixing of our conscience as a nation will begin on the floor of our houses. Remember when Obama was president, he said, I can do all I could for your children, but I will not come home to switch off the television so that they can concentrate on reading and learning about character. Our characters will be fixed from the floor of our houses, from our sanctuaries where we go to worship, whether we are Muslims or Christians or Hindus. We have to fix our ethos. You know, in Japan, it's not about just resigning. If you are accused of corruption, in Japan, just the accusation, you go and hang yourself. Why? Because they say, what a dishonor to me, my children, and my generation to come, that their father and great-grandfather will have been accused of stealing the sweat of the countrymen. And our conscience will need proper fixing. I do not think that the president is entirely bound by the Constitution, you know, such as he is unable to do anything. I've given examples here before, that when the Judicial Service Commission thought that Madam Gladys Boss-Sholei had, you know, acted outside the law and had been involved in a misappropriation of funds, they took administrative action. You must not consult the Constitution or go to court for you to fire a minister that you appointed. Okay, based on your hunch alone, because they may play tricks with the judicial system. They may end up buying a judge or getting a lawyer who is a crook, who will just play games right from the investigation officer. However good Kinoti is, you must know that under him are very shrewd people who may not have been reformed. But I like that they have made progress. The president, in trying to circumvent where the Constitution binds his hands, has appointed a team of brilliant and, you know, forthright young people who are trying to become the Kenya we seek. But the president still has the ability to execute administrative action. If you wake up one morning and you hear that farmers are crying about a particular cabinet secretary, or you hear that there is a PS, that does not need the Constitution. You just wake up and based on your hunch or what you know, and that you're not satisfied with what they are doing, or that the perception about them is wrong, and you are convinced that they may have been involved in perpetrating some of these issues, then the president needs to take administrative action. Fire these people. So the solution would be that for him. For us, it's going to be long and winding, but we will get there if we start yesterday. If we are able to sit amongst ourselves as young people and ask ourselves, where do we want our country to be? And have these discussions as we are having with, you know, Nerima and Philip and all of us who get an opportunity on social or mainstream media to be able to talk and influence the young people. If we are able to point them towards the direction and show them, for example, that you don't make reckless political decisions and hope that the future will be different, that we are able to choose what is right for ourselves and for country and for future, then in 10, 20 years, we will reap from the fruits, of our
All right, now I want
efforts.
us now to look at also the division of revenue bill, which has been a huge problem. And of course, we know that the courts have basically thrown it back to the Senate and the National Assembly to appoint people to mediate. But of course, that then leaves us wondering how active and how intentional that the executive and the National Assembly in terms of promoting devolution. Nerima, I know you work a lot on the ground, and what is the word on the ground in regards to the monies that has not been released to the county governments? And of course, we've seen this week we had a few counties literally going slow because they've not even received as little as their salaries.
There's some counties that they don't even have a budget line for public participation. And yeah, and it's quite worrying. So counties do need resources, that I have seen. And the fact that even right now at the moment we're at such a gridlock, it's the counties that most of the population receives services from county government. It is within the counties. So what we're basically saying is that we have no funding to be able to give services to the Kenyan people, which is a constitutional right. And that's the way it needs to be viewed, other than interests and power political games. And I think that our government, our houses, they need to be able to mediate and come to an understanding, because it's actually hurting the Kenyan citizen, the individual Kenyan person.
All right, Philip.
But before I come on to that, I would like to disabuse this notion that our constitution is the problem. We've had the president appoint Magoha as a CS without a change of the constitution. We've had him elevate Matiang'i for good performance without having to change our constitution. We were just talking a few minutes ago about Raila Odinga and the fact that he seems to be enjoying so much power and that there's so much calm in the country and there's so much positivity going around without having to change the constitution. Meaning, therefore, that our constitution is not the problem. And people should stop hiding beneath it when they do not have the grit to take tough decisions. The president can fire or hire anybody within his cabinet at will. After all, they're serving at his pleasure. If somebody is not performing, and this is what we've been saying over and over, you know, political experience has always been the determinant factors in appointments in this country. Under Jubilee, we saw people being appointed from only 2 communities, in fact, from only 2 villages, because these people are believed to be in a position to secure the ruling elite's powers. But then we've seen where that has taken us. It is the same with the appointment of the DPP, the same with the appointment of Kinoti. All this didn't take any constitutional change. So Kenyans should be wary of these people clamoring for the amendment of the constitution, because it's really not the problem. The handshake between the president and the Honorable Raila Odinga didn't come about as a result of constitutional change. So our constitution is really not the problem. Coming back to this division of revenue bill, we need to see leadership from both houses. You know, we have very questionable individuals leading these 2 houses. If you dig deeper, you'll even realize that there are allegations, serious allegations of corruption touching on some of them, which mysteriously disappeared. And therefore, that is, you know, it is still, again, corruption. This is where all the problem lies. It is the same individuals who took so many of their colleagues to the US the other day on public account. Leadership. Why would these 2 houses not agree? Why wouldn't they agree? I mean, the difference between 316 and 327 billion is a matter of 10 billion. Why can't they meet halfway? The national government, the National Assembly can agree with Senate to a middle ground and have this matter resolved once and for all. And I would like to congratulate Maraga and the courts for the position they have taken and referring this matter back for mediation, because our courts have also been a problem of late. They seem to be intermeddling in all the affairs of the executive. They seem to be dishing orders, you know, in matters in which they are not even competent to deal with. And it is good that instead of issuing an advisory opinion that would have further complicated the matter, they have decided to step back and refer the matter back to the National Assembly so that these people can come up with a solution.
All right, Mark, this division of revenue bill, is it really that Kenya does not have the resources, or are there other political games and power games that are playing in between? Because then, as Kenyans, we need to understand this, because at the end of the day, it's us who bear the brunt.
Well, the fact that Kenya is not dealing with a surplus, it means we don't have money. However, I disagree that 10 billion is the amount of money for which we should have this crisis. If there was a disparity of 100, 200 billion, then let's have a discussion. But 10 billion out of a 3 trillion budget is pocket change. It is like saying you and your wife have refused to agree because she wanted a Mercedes-Benz that costs 1 million, 1.8 million, and you wanted one that costs 1.75 million. So for 50,000, you're filing for divorce. That's essentially what we are doing in this country. It is a very, very, in my view, very ridiculous argument from both houses of parliament. I think they're acting like petulant children. I think, you know, honestly, it's a big ball of nonsense, okay? Because there is no justifiable reason for which you would allow county governments to grind to a halt over a dispute that is less than 10, 15 billion shillings. In fact, let's put it in perspective. All the items on that bill they agree on other than the final amount. That should tell you how petty our senators and our National Assembly leaders are behaving. And so what's the solution? The solution is very simple. What do we believe in as a country? Do we believe in devolution or not? And if we do, then there should be a running policy in the Ministry of Finance that they have aligned all the MPs and all the senators to, including the agency that is in charge of revenue allocation, and everyone is okay. These conversations should have been had years ago. But you see, the problem with our parliament and our senators, they were busy tangatangai and kielewekai. So instead of debating how much money you would get, they were busy campaigning for 2022 as though it is an emergency, while they were not discussing the issues that are important to this country. And that's the problem. Because for as long as our leaders are asleep, okay, they will wake up in the middle of the night and find out, oh, tomorrow, 16% VAT on fuel. Oh my goodness, let us begin to demonstrate when they passed it years ago. Today, they are behaving like the revenue allocation thing surprised that happened overnight. And that's the problem. It is we have unserious leadership. And that's part of the reason why you should always check someone's ability to buy wheelbarrows before you give them bigger positions.
All right, David Sosiani, your thoughts on the Division of Revenue Bill. It's been thrown back to the, to Parliament for them to discuss. But the question, of course, for many Kenyans is why they're disagreeing. What really is the detail that we're missing out on this?
You know, I have said here, without equivocation, I am the greatest proponent of devolution. And whereas we may give excuses and say some governors have misappropriated the funds, I proposed a framework that would reward governors who perform well and that would repudiate harshly governors who, embezzle funds. Up to and including ensuring that counties that utilize the funds correctly get an additional amount above the others that have not performed well. You see, the problem with the Parliament and their stance, because they hold a very firm stand on not increasing the amount that is required by the counties and supported by the Senate. The Commission for Revenue Allocation, which is constitutionally mandated to address and ensure allocation of resources to the counties and our devolved structures, has supported the proposition by the Senate and the governors to give the additional 16 billion. Parliament has refused, and they say that we do not have resources. Now, we have a problem of consistency amongst our leaders. You're not going to tell us that we don't have resources to be able to devolve, yet you become the country that embarrassingly takes 90 people, a delegation of 90, to an event in the United States utilizing 127 million, give or take. That's about 1.2 million spent on every individual who goes down there. And when countries that have been reputed, have a great reputation of corruption like Nigeria, have the courtesy to take 20 compared to their population, which is almost 5 times ours. Now, then you come back home and tell us, no. We do not have money, however, to promote devolution and to ensure that these functions continue. When you have that, that speak from both sides of the cheek, it's embarrassing. And that is why I say, for me, and in my opinion.
But remember, also the senators were in that.
It's okay. It would have been brilliant for members of parliament not to take a delegation there and then now say, you see why we say the senators are wasteful? It's because, you see the things they're doing? They've decided to take a team of 50 to this conference, as opposed to us who refuse that we don't have money, so we have not taken people. When it comes to matters around money, they all find a convergence. When they were added a 250,000 monthly house allowance, they even broke the law to ensure they awarded themselves, which was not necessary. They awarded themselves, and on that, everyone spoke except, I think, 2 MPs who wrote a letter saying, I do not need that extra amount. So, if we are going to speak from both sides of the cheek, then why don't we get this over and done with? And meanwhile, EACC and DCI and DPP should do us the honors of ensuring that previous and current governors who are swindling the county funds are jailed. Because when you do that, the people who follow them and the people working with them now will pick the cue and avoid it. At least you will have stemmed it to an extent.
All right, we need to wind up. I'm told we are out of time, and I want us to finish off with a story that's here on page 5 of The Nation. Which way, Kenya? BBI retreat to write a report. And we've talked about, the constitutional review. And there are some who are waiting with bated breath for BBI to come up with this magic solution that is going to solve Kenya's problems. But, of course, I'm sure you're of a different opinion. I'll start with you, Philip, as we wind up. So you put your closing remarks in whatever you have to say. We're out of time.
Now, like I pointed out a few minutes ago, our constitution is not really the problem. If at all there are any changes which need to be made, then there are very minor changes, just tweaking it here and there to tune it so that it can optimally perform for the country. We have BBI and we have Punguza Mizigo, and we have many other suggestions out there that are not yet on the table. We should be very wary of them as Kenyans. We need to take an audit of our constitution, see what has worked and what has not, see what needs to be changed and what doesn't need to be changed. This should be a process driven by the people, not by the politician and not by the lawyers. As we can see already, it is vested interests which are being pushed or being guarded. For those who are saying we don't need any changes, it's not because they agree with the constitution in total, but rather because it secures powers which they aspire to get. As for those who want changes, again, it is because somehow they see themselves getting jobs or not from whatever changes would be made. So Kenyans should be very wary. They should be very cautious to weigh each and every proposal and agree or disagree with it based on merit. Not because Ruto said so, not because Raila said so, not because Aukot said so, but because it is good for them as individuals, not because it's being pushed down.
All right, Nerima, your closing remarks.
Yeah, I will wait to see the results.
Is there really something to wait for?
I just hope it's not building bridges to nowhere. I really have no comment on BBI.
Okay. Well, the truth of the matter is we already if what politicians are saying, anything to go by, have had the direction it's likely to take. But Mark?
One like Nerima, I am cautiously optimistic. And why? Because my optimism comes from the document I saw after the handshake. That document addressed, by and large, what the problem is in this country, the 9 points. We talked about the software of the country. We talked about electoral reforms. We talked about corruption. We talked about national ethos. We talked about the most important things this country should have. Now, what is my caution? I hope it has not been hijacked by other interests, because if that report is going to deliver on what the intended promise is, then I am very excited to see it. The second part that is critical is we must understand that BBI is giving a report, not a referendum question. And if they just zeroed in on a referendum question, they would have failed on their mandate. There are so many other issues that are to be solved administratively, solved in terms of dialogue between communities. There are so many other solutions that that BBI report should bring on board. But my final closing statement is this. Young people need to stop selecting leaders like we are selecting rap musicians, okay? The quality of a person who does Wamnambez and Pekejeng and all those things you're singing is not the kind of person you want to put on any elective seat, including MCA, whatever. So this idea that we're getting Pekejeng-like people to run for office is not a good idea, young people. Parliament is not a place for rappers and musicians. You understand? The result of it is quite obvious.
It's clear.
And the two rap groups, when they went into parliament, they started fighting because that's what rappers do. So let's be very careful. Select a leader, not a hip-hop artist, to go there.
All right, David, you get the final say on this one.
No, I first need to quip that not all rappers and musicians are bad for leadership. We have excellent ones.
I said Pekejeng. I was very careful.
Giuliani. Some are pretty good.
All right,
what I am saying is the Building Bridges initiative was commenced on the basis of a 9-point agenda that was agreed upon by erstwhile political enemies for the sake of the country and the country's continuation and growth. At that time, we were stagnated. And most of these things are things that are historical, from the issues and questions around, exclusion or inclusivity, to electoral reforms, because that was the basis of our disaster then, to issues around fighting graft and corruption and historical injustices. The BBI must ensure that at the end of it, in my opinion, they just need to answer those 9 points in 9 answers. What solution do we have for our electoral reforms? This. What solutions have we agreed on as the basis for treating and dealing with inclusivity and the exclusion problem? This. How are we going to fight graft? This. How are we going to handle the historical injustices, whether they are about land and stuff like that? This. When we address that 9-point agenda blow by blow, they'll be able to persuade us. But if that document will not speak to the original 9 points addressed when there was the handshake, then they will find themselves in a political place that's a bit precarious. So I hope that they understand that whatever they seek to do, whether they seek to drive us down into a referendum or to find ways that may not need to directly go into a referendum by universal suffrage, they will have addressed the 9-point agenda for this country.
Thank you very much. David Osiani, Philip Magal, Nerima Wako, Mark Bichachi. That is the Week in Review, and thank you for joining us this morning. We have to take a break right now. We continue with the show after the break. This is Morning